A red and blue tin man overlooks the entryway of the San Diego History Center, which leads to an exhibit about a San Diego pioneer. What does it mean to be called a pioneer? Being among the first to settle a new area certainly merits the distinction. The path one takes to get there may often be overlooked, although the story that unfolds can be just as interesting. If you journey up Palomar Mountain from the west, Nate Harrison Grade is the twisty serpentine dirt road that leads up. In some ways, it symbolizes the life of its namesake and the roundabout way he became a pioneer and legend of San Diego. Nathan Harrison was born enslaved in Kentucky around 1833. The very same year, the Slavery Abolition Act was passed in the British colonies, freeing more than 800,000 Africans in the Caribbean, South Africa, and Canada. In the United States, however, widespread freedom from slavery wouldn't be granted until 30 years later, when President Lincoln passed the Emancipation Proclamation during the Civil War and the 13th Amendment to the Constitution at the end of the war. Out west in 1848, a carpenter named James Marshall found flecks of gold in the tail race leading away from the water wheel at Sutter's Mill, located east of where Sacramento is now. Here's a monument at the actual site of Sutter's Mill. Marshall and the owner John Sutter tried to keep the gold a secret, gathering as much as they could. The discovery, however, soon leaked out, and many of Sutter's own men stopped work to dig for their share of gold along the American River. By the end of 1848 and into 1849, gold prospectors were arriving from across the country as well as around the world from Mexico, Chile, Peru, and China. The California gold rush had started. Sutter's property became overrun with miners, and he had to give up the dream of creating his own settlement at that location. His son would go on to establish the town of Sacramento, which became California's state capital in 1854. To show the magnitude of the gold rush, the population of California in 1840 was 8,000 people. By 1850, it was 100,000. Another way to think of it is to take the current populations of Canada, the United States, and Mexico, then cram them all into the state of California. The huge influx of people required the need for a civil government, and California officially became a state in 1850. Records show Nathan Harrison was 19 years old when he arrived in Santa Clara County, shaded red at the bottom. At the time, it extended further east into Stanislaus and Merced, close to locations rich with gold and other precious metals. For the next decade, he traveled with his owner to mine for gold in the yellow-shaded area of Northern California, working in the Mother Lode region. An estimated 750,000 pounds of gold were discovered in the Mother Lode region during the gold rush. In 2023, that amount of gold is worth $24 billion. Although California joined the Union as a free state, slavery still existed there in the 1850s. After the death of his enslaver, Harrison made his way further south to Palomar Mountain. Dr. Seth Malios and his team of SDSU archaeology students began excavation of Harrison's homestead on Palomar Mountain in 2004. As we'll see later, what they find provides further insight into his life. A man named Joseph Smith oversaw the Butterfield Overland Mail stagecoach line from his homestead on Palomar Mountain. It transported mail and passengers from Tennessee and Missouri to San Francisco, passing by Warner's Ranch and along the north of Palomar Mountain. Stagecoaches like this one ran the operation from 1857 to 1861, just before the start of the Civil War. Joseph Smith hired a ranch hand who later murdered him in 1868, reportedly for gold. Nathan Harrison and other locals in the area tracked down the suspect. When he admitted to killing Smith, they sentenced him to hang, and Palomar Mountain was renamed Smith Mountain in honor of Joseph Smith. The name remained until the turn of the century, when it reverted back to Palomar Mountain. Palomar, by the way, means pigeon roost or pigeon house in Spanish. The band-tailed pigeon is native to California and lives in the mountainous areas of San Diego County, with a concentration around Palomar Mountain. They move up and down the mountain and descend to the base in the summertime to feed on elderberries and dry brush. Nathan Harrison was not entirely stationary and worked different jobs in Riverside County, San Diego County, as well as the city of San Diego itself. He was employed as a laborer, rancher, cook, timberman, and shopkeeper in regions around San Diego. In Old Town, the Robinson Rose Visitor Center provides information about the origins of San Diego. The Rose name refers to Lewis Rose, who purchased the building from Robinson's widow. He is also the namesake of Rose Creek and Rose Canyon. He was San Diego's first Jewish settler, serving as the postmaster, and worked out of his store in Old Town. Upon leaving for a business trip in the north, Rose left Nathan Harrison in charge of minding his store. In addition to this, Harrison was to care for Rose's large pet tortoise, Chili. The tortoise went missing shortly after Rose's departure. Harrison tried locating the tortoise, but couldn't leave the store in order to serve customers. Once Rose returned after 2 weeks, Harrison organized a posse that located Chili a few miles away. U.S. voter registrations from 1875 to 1879 place Nathan Harrison in the Fallbrook area. Here's a much later voter card from 1894, which gives us a sense of his physical appearance. He was 61 years old, 5 foot 3 inches tall, with dark complexion, eyes, and hair. He registered himself as a farmer, born in Kentucky and residing in the Paula area. It's signed with an X or plus sign and the words "His Mark" above and below. This leads us to believe Nathan Harrison was illiterate. By 1879, Nathan Harrison moved to Rincon and filed a land patent claim for 112 acres. He lives on the land, making him the first African-American homesteader in San Diego County. Harrison is baptized by the Rincon chief Juan Sotelo Calac, pictured here with his wife, who becomes Harrison's godmother. Nathan is given the confirmation name Inez. He symbolically becomes part of the Luiseno tribe, was fluent in the Luiseno language, and married Luiseno Indian women twice. A picture of Dory Mary Smith was found on his property. She was the granddaughter of his first wife. Next to her photo is an iron cross showing Harrison's Catholic faith and a wedding band showing he was married. Nathan Harrison did travel even after establishing his homestead on Palomar Mountain. Both San Jacinto and Bear Valley townships listed him as a 50-year-old single black farmer in their 1880 census reports. Julian, California, which is now famous for its apple pie and snowfall in the winter, was home to a larger African American population in the late 19th century. Of the 55 African Americans in San Diego County, 33 lived in Julian. Legal documentation shows Harrison was present in Julian on September 24, 1881. He was arrested for public intoxication and initially fined $10. Later, Harrison was forgiven and the charge was dropped. In 1882, Harrison sold his 112-acre property for the sum of $300 and moved about 2/3 of the way up the west side of Palomar Mountain. A decade later, he obtained a homestead certificate for 45 acres and filed for the water claim rights to the freshwater spring that was on his land. He would frequently offer fresh water from his spring to travelers on horseback or automobiles. By the end of 1896, a survey map showed the grade winding up the west side of Palomar Mountain with the words N. Harrison next to it. The following year, a consent form from the County of San Diego shows Nathan Harrison's approval of turning the trail by his property into a public road. Let's take a look at the construction of his cabin. It's an exact 11-foot by 11-foot square. This square footprint is the typical shape used for slaves' quarters. If we look at other cabins like the one of Joseph Smith, they normally have a rectangular shape. By building his house square, Harrison's cabin is said to be the only slave housing west of the Mississippi. By 1900, Harrison was close to 70 years old, which was far older than the 20 to 25-year average lifespan for African Americans born in his generation. He became more stationary living at his place on the west side of Palomar Mountain, which, in turn, was becoming a tourist destination. The city widened the road that led past his homestead, and Nathan Harrison found that he himself was also a tourist attraction of sorts. Nathan Harrison's longevity and agreeable life can be attributed to his personality and disarming character. To put it into perspective, let's look briefly into the story of John Ballard. Just like Harrison, Ballard came from Kentucky and was a former slave. He traveled with his family to Los Angeles in 1859. By 1880, he had purchased land and moved his family again to the Santa Monica Mountains to raise livestock and grow crops. John Ballard was an intelligent and literate man. Racial tension still remained from the Civil War, and thieves tried to chase him out of his home. His cabin was set on fire twice, and he rebuilt both times. He was a hard worker and refused to let others drive him off his land. He was determined to show others he must be treated with human dignity and respect, regardless of the color of his skin. Whereas John Ballard was noble to fight for equality and against oppression, Nathan Harrison had a different way of approaching these situations. Just as a medieval jester was the only person who could make fun of the king, Harrison used his charm and personality to gain the goodwill and friendship of those he encountered. In the early 1800s, minstrel shows were an American form of theater that had comic skits, dancing, and musical performances. Unfortunately, they were racist in nature, with Caucasians painting their faces and depicting African Americans in an unfavorable light. Nathan Harrison was well aware of this and would put on an act of his own to win the favor of those making their way up Palomar Mountain. He didn't have to stretch his performance too far, as it seems he was naturally warm and kind-hearted. The trip from San Diego to Palomar Mountain would take 3 days, and Harrison could see people riding up the grade hours before they reached him. He had pails of fresh water ready to quench the thirst of travelers and their horses, or to cool off the hot car engines that struggled up the mountain. He stood by the side of the road, smiling with his walking stick. Although he was a shepherd, and the excavation at his homestead showed extensive horse tack, he refrained from presenting himself to others atop a horse, as this would literally show he was above other people. Instead, he would stand on the ground with his 5-foot 3-inch frame, willing to help others making their way up the mountain. He invited visitors into his cabin and would entertain them with stories about the antebellum South before the Civil War, the gold rush, or the region where he lived around Palomar Mountain. The stories he spun are quite possibly the reason why he became a local legend and an attraction of San Diego County. The life he lived and his proficiency in embellishment enthralled those who journeyed up Palomar Mountain to hear the tales he told. Some stories may have been created by others, only adding to his lore, bringing his stature closer to being a mythological hero or champion. According to some tales, he escaped slavery in the 1840s by floating down the Mississippi River, joined the Mormon Battalion in 1846, and marched 2,100 miles from Iowa to San Diego. He sailed around South America's Cape Horn in 1849 during the gold rush, killed a mountain lion twice as big as any other at 14 feet in length, has night vision 10 to 100 times better than any other human, buried a significant stash of gold somewhere on his property, and lived to be 107 years old. Although they were stories, it helped others to associate with him and served to break down the barriers between races and social classes of the time. Despite being isolated near the top of the mountain, Harrison interacted with many people. He had friends and acquaintances that were Jewish, Native American, African American, Caucasian, Spanish, and Mexican, and was connected to other Palomar residents, shepherds, San Diego's sheriff, railroad engineers, and community developers. Nathan Harrison was the most photographed San Diegan of his time, performing an online search, for example, of Alonzo Horton or Wyatt Earp yields less photos of each. Nathan Harrison had 2 friends that were photographers, and there is evidence he had a Kodak Brownie camera as well. When examining the photographs taken, he appears the way he wants visitors to see him, as a humble, helpful homesteader, willing to lend a hand to those in need of a respite while ascending Palomar Mountain. When looking at archaeological evidence uncovered from the grid map on his patio, another slightly different life begins to emerge. Let's take a look inside the cabin and see what types of items were found. The entryway is low to match Nathan Harrison's height. A greenstone pendant and an iron cross we saw earlier show Harrison's connection with the Luiseno tribe and Catholicism. In the Old West, Catholics were persecuted, and Harrison kept this to himself. He was accepted into the Luiseno tribe and even allowed to dance in their ritual ceremonies, yet he kept this fact hidden away, as the United States was still actively at war with local indigenous populations. The meerschaum pipe on the right translates from German as sea foam and was most certainly used by Harrison. California state law prohibited the sale of firearms or munitions to California Indians or to persons known to associate with Indians. Harrison owned a rifle, but never held it when travelers arrived, and never let anyone see it. The excavation on his property shows over 200 rifle cartridges, the majority of which are .22 caliber rimfire ammunition. Harrison presented himself as being illiterate when travelers stopped by his cabin. He wanted to make himself as non-threatening as possible to draw less attention. Uncovered on his patio, however, were writing instruments like pencil lead, erasers, and a pen cap and clip, indicating he may have feigned his illiteracy. Some of the other items found include a quarter, the watchback from a pocket watch, and a picture of Chief Kalak. Next to these harness rings and buckle is a sardine can with its key. Many visitors would bring canned goods as gifts for Harrison. The archaeological team found more than 223 buttons and many President brand suspender clips, suggesting that clothes like blue jeans were also brought up Palomar Mountain as gifts. In 1919, Harrison was 86 years old. His health was fading, and it said he could not walk and had to crawl on his hands and knees. A railroad engineer named Ed Quinlan, who often visited Palomar Mountain, convinced Harrison to seek medical attention. The San Diego Union-Tribune reported in October 1919, Harrison was transported to the San Diego County General Hospital. In 1920, from his hospital bed, with no need to put on an act anymore, Nathan Harrison admitted to a census taker that he was literate after all. When Nathan Harrison passes away in October 1920, his remains are buried in an unmarked grave at Mount Hope Cemetery. By 1923, funds are raised by his friends from the mountain community to build a monument at the hairpin on Nate Harrison's grade, near where his cabin once stood. In 1933, Palomar Mountain State Park is founded, with an increasing number of visitors. The following year, Nathan Harrison's abandoned cabin is torn down for safety concerns. The Harrison Serenity Ranch now owns the land where Nathan Harrison's cabin once stood. They permitted the archaeological excavations to preserve history and are dedicated to uphold the natural environment of the surrounding area. Finally, in 1972, a marker was placed on Nathan Harrison's unmarked grave. Look closely at the dates. Although voter registrations imply his birth year to be around 1833, this headstone reads a much earlier year. Perhaps it's a tribute to the epic tale of his life, and even in death, Nathan Harrison lives on as a legend of San Diego and one of its first pioneers. If you want to hear another epic tale, one told about seaman apprentice Douglas Hegdahl, pictured on the right, search for and view the San Diego Review on Open Doors Vietnam POWs after this one. If you enjoyed this video, support this channel for free by clicking like, sharing this video with others, and last but not least, clicking subscribe. Thanks for watching San Diego Review.